Hello and welcome to this episode of the Be the Push podcast. This is the podcast where we talk to business owners, entrepreneurs and professionals about the tough times they've had to push through in their careers. So what went wrong, when it went wrong, why it went wrong, and how they feel about it now that they've got a chance to reflect on those difficult times and how they got through them. Today's guest is Dr Emily Verstege. Now, Emily is a skilled diagnostician who helps businesses to diagnose their problems and try and help them get through those issues. Specialising in customer experience, Emily's had a career that spanned a lot of fields, however, and we talk about a few things in this episode, including when Emily started a tech startup a few years ago, and what that process was like, how difficult it really was, and what it was like to have to shut that business down. So I'm just going to give you a sneak peek of the stories around Emily's tech startup right now before we delve right into the episode.
And during this time, this 18 months, you're running this tech startup. So what was weekends or time away from work like? Like, were you able to turn off? Was there any time away from work?
No, there was not.
Okay.
There was not. I can remember traveling to Italy so my husband's sister was getting married in Italy, and at that time we were putting together a proposal for a European game studio, and of course these things always happen at the same, there's always there's no separation. Like, of course that deadline was the day before the wedding, or the timelines were very similar. And I can remember being in we were staying in Como in Italy, and my husband and I were basically tag teaming tourist things. So he would, so we're there for his sister's wedding.
Wow. Yeah.
And he'd be like, well, I'm going to go with my sister to Bellagio. You stay here and work on this version of the document. So I'd be there and then he'd come back and I'd say, well, I'm going to go have dinner with your folks. You stay here. And it was bullshit. It was seriously, there was 18 months of our lives were just written off with that. And, you'd book in think, okay, this Friday night we've got nothing on. We're just going to chill out and be normal human beings. And then something would explode. There'd be some kind of, I don't know, a server would eat a line of code or something like that, and everything. And all of a sudden, because our development team was based in Europe, so everything was always done at ridiculous kind of time zone differences. So my husband in particular would be staying up until all hours of the night, and my brother, who was based in France, would be, staying up all day and staying up all night so that we could kind of catch... stupid.
Hello and welcome to the Be the Push podcast. My name is Jack Ferguson, and I'm going to be sharing with you stories of how business owners and entrepreneurs had to push through the hard times in their careers. We're going to be discussing the lessons learned from these experiences while arming you with actionable advice so you can be the push when you need it most. Show notes can be found at bethepush.com/podcast and clicking on the relevant episode link. Let's get started. And that's just one of the stories we have coming up in this episode around Emily's time running a tech startup. She talks also about going global from day one and all the complexity that goes along with that. You've got to deal with logistics and currency and overseas culture and a whole range of things that perhaps we wouldn't think about unless you started a global business. I certainly hadn't have thought about a lot of these things before. We also talk about Emily's decision not to become a medical doctor. Now, that's a difficult decision within itself if you're wanting to do that for a lot of your life. But also, we talk about the social pressure that goes along with deciding not to do and I say this in air quotes, an esteemed job or an esteemed career path. So that's a really interesting insight into some of the pressures that we face in society to do what others expect of us. The last thing I wanted to mention before we get into the episode is the discussions we have coming up around becoming or being a solo entrepreneur as opposed to working in a team. Now, Emily feels like she's one of those people that works better as a solopreneur. I completely understand that. I'm very similar. So we talk about the challenges working in a team, and especially if you're strong-minded like a lot of us are, and I'm sure you are too, how difficult it can be to sort of toe the line at times, and how you manage that, how you deal with that when you have to do some things that perhaps you don't think are worth doing. But I'm going to stop with the preamble now. Let's get into the episode with Emily. It's a great episode again. I really thoroughly enjoyed talking to Emily, and I hope you enjoy. So here we go. Awesome. So today we're here with Dr Emily Verstege. Emily, how are you doing today?
Pretty good, thanks. And yourself?
I'm very well, thanks. Now, you're an expert at diagnosis. You identify, simplify, and solve complex problems at the intersection between people, business, and technology. Now, I wanted to skip straight to that in this podcast because that's probably one of my favourite descriptions of someone I've heard in a while.
It's nice to know. It only took me about 4 years to work out. So
right. So what's that mean?
Well, it means that the thing that I guess I'm good at is stripping away complexity, and I'm good at having people go blah, 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 and I can go, oh, okay, this is the problem. This is what we need to do about it. Very similar to the way that you might come crashing through the doors in an emergency department, and, the doctor's looking at you and they're going, okay, you've got a bleeding head and your leg's about to fall off, but the first thing that we need to do is, send you to X-ray. And I guess that's what I do in a business context. And I think that the business world, the world that we're in now, this disrupted world, most problems are complex. There's often several layers of complexity, and most people are just looking for simplicity amongst that. So they need complexity stripped away. They need somebody who can kind of say, here's what's going on, here's what you need to do about it. And that's me.
Cool. So you do this for businesses, right? And I really love this because I think that I like to think of when I'm doing my marketing consultancies, I reckon 90% of the work is diagnosis, is just understanding what they need, because sometimes a lot of the time the client doesn't know themselves.
Yeah.
And then I find myself that, okay, then the solution from that point on usually isn't all that hard.
No, we can't tell people that the solution's not rocket science, can we?
No. But I do, like, I have come to that out of my own sort of business life, I suppose, that the diagnosis is so critical, right? And it's funny, like I mean, you're obviously a doctor, and I think I did a pharmacy degree, and I have an AMH.
You hide that well.
I don't talk about that much, but I have an AMH at home, so the Australian Medicine's Handbook, and if someone came to me with, I have this problem, I would be able to open that book and go, okay, this is what you need to treat it. Yeah. But obviously the skill is in diagnosing that problem before it. Yeah. So I find that fascinating, and I just loved hearing that the diagnosis part is what is really what you focus on. Yeah,
and I think some people are content area experts and some people are methodology experts. So, you've probably got a bit of both going on there. So you're an expert in marketing, and you're also an expert in some element of the marketing process. So somebody comes to you with a marketing problem, or a problem more generally, and you can apply that. This is what we do at the first step, second, third, and fourth step to work out what they need to do next. But you're applying that through the filter of your content area expertise.
Makes sense. And how tough do you find it to find out, to diagnose something? Because sometimes I'll ask someone a question and they give the answer they want to give, not the actual answer to the question you ask. So do you have like a process or a methodology to getting the information you need out of someone?
I think the answer for me is to come at it from a number of different perspectives. So in my old life, as a policy analyst, I guess we would always come at a problem from a number of different perspectives, and come at it from different collect different data from different sources, different types of data from different people, and then triangulate it, bring it all together. And I think it's you probably experience this as well. If you ask somebody, somebody will give you an answer once, but then they might throw up something in an answer to another question that makes you go, hang on, those two things don't line up. So you've got to ask another question. So always ask the next question to do that triangulation, to make sure that they're not fibbing.
Yes, yeah. Do you ever feel like, I worry that I'm getting annoying when I do that? Yeah.
I'm happy with annoying.
Yeah. All right. So, really cool. So, how did your career start off? What was step one for Emily?
Step one for me was that I always wanted to be a medical doctor. So let's point that out just now. So I am a doctor. I'm a PhD.
Right.
I'm not a medical doctor, but medicine was what I really wanted to do, and it was all I was kind of focused on right up to the point at which I got provisionally accepted into medicine. And so in Queensland, where we are, or at least it was at the time, medicine is a postgraduate degree. So you do an undergrad degree and then you go through a series of increasingly high hurdles to be accepted into medicine. So sat the entrance exam twice, overachiever, and got accepted to an interview, which is almost like the rubber stamp at the end of the process. But there's a time difference between being offered the interview and actually doing it, of about 2 months. And in that interspersing 2 months, I met a boy, and his sister was a junior medical officer, which is basically the lowest of the low when it comes to, they're the most junior medical professional in a hospital, and they work really hard. And so she was a JMO, and she was driving home from a 36-hour shift, and she fell asleep at the wheel and she died. And that experience it kind of flipped the switch in my head, where I realised that I didn't have that level of commitment in me to be a medical doctor, but I also didn't know what else I wanted to do. So in extricating myself from being a medical doctor, I had to come up with a new kind of frame of reference for myself as for a career. I had no idea what I was going to do, and it's interesting that now some 15, almost 20 years later, I've come full circle, and I now describe myself as an expert diagnostician. And I think the skills that would have made me a really good doctor, a good medical doctor, now make me really good at the job that I do now. So it's that same process of being able to be under pressure and take in a whole bunch of different information to arrive at an answer. But there's also the people component as well, which I'm really passionate about. So that's how I started out. And I went, instead of doing medicine, I did honours in science, and I kind of cross-enrolled across two schools, so the School of Physiology and Pharmacology and also the School of Public Health. And then I was offered a PhD scholarship, which I took, had no idea what else to do. But then I did I started down the academic track. So once I finished my PhD, I started a postdoctoral research fellowship, which didn't go so well or last very long.
Okay. Obviously, sorry you had that experience. That sounds horrible with the guy you're seeing, his sister. Was that that was the catalyst that said to you, I don't want to do this? Was that was the moment that you changed your mind? It was. And I guess the strict definition of a catalyst is it's not, necessarily. It was just the moment that made me realise something that I'd been harbouring. I think various people had said to me, well, medicine's cruel, it's tough, it's not going to be what you think it's going to be. You're really good at the humanities. I can remember my French teacher being quite disturbed when I told her that I wanted to study medicine. She's like, oh, but you're so good at languages, you're so good at the arts and people. And but at that stage I was very determined. So I guess I had those kind of suspicions that maybe it was going to be too tough or too not me or something, and then in that moment it just kind of flipped. And so from that moment, for the next sort of couple of months, 3 months, what was that process like? Did you kind of feel like all right, what's next? How am I going to navigate the next? Completely, because I guess I'd been focused, I'd been talking about being a doctor probably since I was in, upper primary school. So, to follow that through for about 10 or 12 years of study, to suddenly be going, oh, now I have to find something else. And, oh gosh, I can, I had my poor family, I'd come home and I'd be like, I'm going to be a nurse, I'm going to be a this, I'm going to be a that. And, I had all the different QTAC books and, basically I had no idea what I was going to do. And I think one of the difficult parts of it was that my circle of
my circle of friends, most of those people who I'd gone through university with went on to do medicine.
Right.
And so it was a case of losing an identity, but also losing a social kind of connectedness, because they were all like, "You're mad! Like, being a doctor is the best thing ever. Why would you not want to do it?" And that naturally put distance between us.
Yeah, right. So a lot of them, are they still doctors? Oh, okay. So it was for them.
For many of them, it's been, that was the career decision that they made, and some of them are very happy, some of them are not so happy.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. All right. So when did you first want to be a doctor? Was it, teenager? Was it, how far are we going back when?
Yeah. Like I said, I think it was probably middle of primary school that I thought that that's what I'd like to do. And, part of it is because when you grow up in I was a big fish in a small pond. I grew up in a little town just outside Toowoomba, and, there weren't that many kids in our class at school. So I was always pretty academic. And I think naturally, God knows why, but naturally when you do show a bit of academic promise, then people are like, "Oh, you're going to be a doctor? Are you going to be a lawyer?" They kind of push you towards those kind of professions. But for me, one of the reasons that I wanted to be a doctor was because I just love human anatomy, which sounds really freaky, but I just love the way that the body's put together. And my grandpa used to want to be a doctor and didn't have the opportunity to do that, but he had lots of physiology books lying around the house, and including some of those some hand-drawn atlases of the human body. So I was always, and one of them just had like flaps that you could pick up, and you could go skin and then muscles down to underneath to the organs, to the skeleton, and that just fascinated me. And I think that probably kind of ignited my love of biology and physiology. And
oh, awesome. I just want to go back to that point you made about the you kind of, if you do well academically, you're kind of pushed into you might got to be a doctor, or you got to be a lawyer, or you got to be because I can totally relate to that. And I went, and here the listeners going to go, here he is bashing university again, but I went and did university as well.
Yeah.
I did university, and my soul was eroding by the end of it, because I'm finishing this degree that I know I'm never gonna really do. So, and the partying was all right for a while until, but that got
till your liver packed it in.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't doing anything. Yeah. There wasn't any substance to me really, because I was, if you get good marks, you got to go and do one of these jobs, and. I actually found it really limiting as well for me. I don't know if you find the same thing, but I felt like I was working within this system that I didn't agree with a lot of it. So I don't know. Like I'd be interested in your view on how we have to choose very early what career or what we're going to be. Yeah. We have no idea at 17 or 18 we don't even know what work is like, really.
You don't know who you are, so how can you define? Work is such a defining thing, right? I often joke that the job that I ended up doing, for the most part of my career to date, so as a policy analyst, that was not in any QTAC book anywhere. And I think the problem is going to be more pronounced now, because, there are various kind of studies around showing that the skills that we're teaching kids now at school are going to be irrelevant in an employment context in the next 5 years. So, the things that matter most are critical thinking and problem solving and creativity. And some of those things don't necessarily fit well within a formal education context, do they? They're kind of, at least not in a scientific one. Yeah.
I almost feel like they're kind of telling you how to think. But, in a lot of ways we need to really learn how to think ourselves. But on that critical analysis point, is that something that you were naturally good at, or did you develop that ability, would you say?
Look, I think I've been experimented on from a very early age. My mum's a kindergarten teacher, and so I think for her kind of coming at it from a formal, her area of expertise, and my dad is just naturally wants to learn about the world around him. So I think my brother and I were always encouraged to ask why, which now, as the parent of a 3-year-old, I realise is a really irritating question, but so kind of important, because you know, for all the reasons we've just been talking about, curiosity needs to be kind of cultivated. So yeah, I think that was fostered in me from a young age.
Cool. All right. So you talked about being a policy analyst. What does that mean?
So a policy analyst is basically a consultant who, in my kind of experience, who was a hired gun for large government organisations, state and Commonwealth government organisations, and we were engaged to effectively to answer the question, what works for whom and under what circumstances. So if you can think that, you know, it's in the news at the moment, the cashless welfare payments system that's just been evaluated. So that was effectively that's a really good example of somebody's been brought in to look at something that the government has set up, and then that particular consultant is going out and collecting all sorts of different data to pull together an answer about, is it working, is it not working, did it reach the people it was supposed to reach, if not, why not, and what are we going to do about it?
Mm-hmm. Cool. And that was following the medicine, or have I skipped a job here?
No, you haven't.
Okay.
But let's just, so for the sake of the people listening at home, so I didn't do medicine. So I did a science degree, didn't do medicine, did honours in science, did my PhD, started a research, like a postdoctoral research fellowship, and then that kind of exploded, and I started my own consultancy, and one of the companies that I was consulting to then hired me. So that's when I spent 10 years almost working with them as a public policy analyst.
Yeah, cool. So was that your first business?
Yeah, it was.
Cool.
Yeah.
And what was your before you started? What did you think of business? And in the first 1 to 2 years, what did you think of business after that?
I think my dad still runs his own business, so I've had that, and my mum she was a kindergarten teacher, but she set up the kindergarten that she worked at for 20 something years. So I think I've always had that kind of entrepreneurial example, and I always knew kind of somewhere in the back of my mind, I guess, that I would like to do business. I didn't know what that meant, but I thought, you know, I wouldn't mind having a crack. And so when I was winding up my postdoctoral research fellowship, and my boss at the time said to me, what are you going to do? In that moment, I was just like, well, I'm going to set up my own business. And I had no idea what I was going to do, or, you know, who would want to work with me. But, you know, I had kind of no other options at that time. So I went, seems like a good idea to start my own business in that environment.
Right. And we talk about some of the hard times we have to push through on this podcast. So starting the business, was that one of them for you?
Yeah, it was, because I mean there was a lot of I guess shame's probably not too strong a word, associated with not being, you know, so we've spoken about the whole not wanting to do medicine and probably feeling like a failure because I didn't actually, you know, oh geez, maybe I'm too soft. So that was something obviously that I internalized, and then the postdoctoral research fellowship. So that was kind of my second career, if you like, and that hadn't worked either. And so I think there was probably a little bit of maybe you suck at everything. And then going into my own business, I think that was actually easier, and the realization that I've now had is that I make a pretty crap employee. I'm a much better, you know, I'm too, I don't like the word bossy, but I think I work better as a solopreneur than as part of a team.
Got it. So that's why you don't feel like you're a good employee, because you just see, well, we should be doing it this way. Yeah. And I really struggled to I can totally relate to that, by the way. But you kind of struggle to see why are we ticking these boxes that are important.
Yeah. And if I don't agree with it, I mean, that's been consistent feedback that I've had both from that postdoctoral research fellowship and my second like long stint of employment was, you know, you've got quite a lot of opinions and you think you always know the right way. Of course.
Yeah.
And then I married a Dutchman who's got a similar kind of life philosophy. Right. So that's interesting. I was we were having a conversation last night. I'm trying to I'm building my website, and he works in IT. So I was asking him for some advice, and he's like, "You always get so bossy when you're." I said, "Well, it's mine. I really care about it," and I think that's. Yeah, I probably should do some therapy around not being so so pushy.
But it is interesting you bring that up. I mean, I was talking to someone recently, and they're doing, I can't even remember the university degree he's doing, but he's doing something. He was telling me about the assignments they're doing and stuff. And I'm saying, is that really going to help you do any job related to this degree? Mm-hmm. No. But he said he can handle doing ticking boxes and doing pointless shit to, to get the degree at the end or whatever. Whereas perhaps people like us can't really deal with that pointless shit. It's I totally relate it. Like, there's going to be purpose, right, in what we do. Otherwise,
it's funny. I feel like I have a tipping point because like the friend you're describing, to some, to some extent I can go, you know what, I just got to do it, and I do like rules, like that is, to some extent that's part of my personality. But then almost I have, as I'm getting older, I realize that I am kind of quite creative and entrepreneurial, and the more I kind of lean into that side of my personality, the less time and interest I've got in the rules per se.
Very interesting. And do you like or dislike being called bossy, or is that what's your take on that?
Oh, look, I've got probably a feminist standpoint on that.
Yeah.
And I was always called bossy at school.
Right.
You're so bossy and you're telling people what to do. And now, as the mother of 2 little girls, I think bossy is probably not the best word, because I want them to stand up and be counted, and I don't want them to feel that they need to swallow their opinion for anyone. So when I am being directed around the house by my 3-year-olds, I'm like, oh my God, you're bossy. But at the same time, I'm living the struggle of not verbalizing that.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and it probably is something that's, I don't think I've ever been called bossy, but I am very opinionated. So yeah, it's probably something more unique to being a woman, I suppose. I
think you're right.
But yeah, I mean, but the part of me says as well, a lot of people are so passive and do need that rocket. Like, we do need people who are going to, direct others and lead, but also manage.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, no, very interesting. All right, so why don't we talk about some of the tough times you've been through? Where do you want to start? What story do you want to go with first?
So, I mean, we've been talking about being entrepreneurial, or a business owner versus a team player, and I think that was I've alluded to a number of times about not the postdoctoral research fellowship not going so well, and for me that was a really tough time, because it was my first ever real job. I mean, God, I was 25, but my first ever real job coming out of university, and I didn't understand the dynamics of a working, of an office environment, and I didn't understand, that there were egos involved, and that I could potentially achieve the same aim, but just not by crashing through and steamrolling everybody. And I didn't, I kind of felt that I was playing an honest hand, but that was picked up and misconstrued in so many ways in that environment. So I think that was a really, that was a moment of growing up, to realise that those kind of environments do exist, and to start to understand why certain workplaces do permit and facilitate that kind of negativity, and that was something that stayed with me, I think, for a good. It kind of even resurfaces now, but that it really did knock the wind out of my sails. I was full of excitement and enthusiasm going into that job, and it really did take my confidence away from me, and then going again, you know, having a bit of time in my own business, but then going back into an employee style relationship, you know, I would often default to, oh my God, you know, I've said something, I've done the wrong thing, I'm going to lose my job. So I think that it was a very formative experience for a bad reason.
Right. And how long into that job did you, before
6 months.
6 months, and you, oh dear, and it's like, ugh.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you feel that those type of organisations and environments, I suppose they lose sight of the reason they're there as well, right? If they get too focused on the internal, would that be fair to say?
If I think about that particular kind of cultural context, it was always, you know, from a structural perspective. So if you think about a university, where the context is naturally competitive, because tertiary research, there's a finite amount of money and you're competing. So you're competing with people all over the country, but you're also kind of competing with the person sitting next to you in the office.
Right.
You know, you've got to publish more than them. You've got to secure research money, secure research funding, and so that sets up a very competitive dynamic. And I don't think that that's particularly nice. I mean, that sets people up to be negative and kind of undermining. And so I don't necessarily. Yeah, I think that workplace was kind of the product of that broader systemic environment.
Yep. Would there be anything you'd change about it? Like, would there be ways you think it could be structured better, or?
Without going into higher education policy, I'm not entirely sure that it could be structured better. But I think, you know, as collaboration in its true sense, the collaborative spirit. You know, people were talking collaboration, but not necessarily doing it because the environment was set up such that they kind of wouldn't. Would there be anything I would change about my conduct in that environment? Probably yes. You know, with the 15 years or 20 years, however long it's been, hindsight, I would do things differently. I think the outcome would still be the same. I would probably still go, yeah, it's not the place for me, or it's not the context for me. But I probably wouldn't have been such a pig-headed little person.
Right. So I would be interested if you're willing to share, like, what those things are you would do differently.
I think now I would just have my head, having you know, had 15 or 20 years in a workplace, I'm much more aware of what that is, and you know, there is always, you know, there are certain personality types in every single workplace, and I think understanding that people's motives are not always pure, particularly in a competitive environment. There's possibly reasons why people are doing or saying particular things. I've forgotten the question.
Is there things you do? What were the things you do differently?
Yeah, I guess I would probably just be more wise to people's motives.
So did you think the best of people in the start? Was that part of it?
Yeah. And I guess I was working for people. I was working in it. Someone gave me some advice when I went into that particular job, which was you should never work for somebody that you've previously worked for in a previous, like where the power imbalance is different. So for me, coming into that job, I was working with someone who had previously been my supervisor, so my direct supervisor. And then coming into that role, we were, in my head, much more equal. Yeah. But I guess it's like, you know, when a family business gets set up and, you know, you're the father and you're working with your son. So you're always going, he's my son. He's like 3. He's not capable of anything. Or even though the son's maybe like 33, things have obviously changed. But there's that established way of looking at each other and relating to each other. And so I think the person, maybe the thing that I would change would be to listen to the advice that the person gave me, which was like, you know, might not necessarily be the best idea to go into a working environment where you think you're equal, but you're actually probably being perceived as not equal.
Right. Fascinating. That's really interesting. Do you think? I think I probably have observed a similar thing with age as well. When someone like I'm not, I'm in my 20s still, obviously, and when I work in some environments, I think I come up against like an age barrier at times. Like and even if someone's in a completely different department or whatever within the company that I'm working with, they think, because I'm young, surely I can't know much. So, and they know more about my expertise than I do. Yeah. So I don't know if that's a similar kind of parallel there, but
I think it is. I think you're right.
All right. So you obviously left this job at a point in time. What was next?
So next was starting my own business, which I ran for about 18 months, and then being headhunted's the wrong word because it makes me sound more important than I actually was, but I started doing permanent kind of contracting and became an employee of one of my clients, and I worked there for must have been 8 years before I had my first daughter and went on to maternity leave. And that particular job is, as a consultant, a public policy consultant, that environment is really tricky if you're not doing it full time.
Okay.
And I found that really difficult to manage on the other side of maternity leave, coming back, and
right.
It requires a lot of face-to-face client time, or at least synchronous client time. You need to be able to respond to their emails when they're sending you emails, and it's tricky when you're not working full time.
Okay. Right. And I can see there's a tech startup in here somewhere. Where did that come into things?
So that was something that was kind of playing out towards, as I was still growing in that consultancy practice. So kind of about the time that I was being promoted up to senior consultant level, my husband and my brother and my parents and myself as well, but I had a much more passive role because I actually had a job that was paying me money. So we founded a tech startup. Yep. And we heard, you and I heard Aaron Berkeby talk the other night about tech startup land just being a monumental roller coaster, and I would absolutely agree with that. So our startup so my brother and my husband are in IT. My dad, as I previously mentioned, has an import-export business, which makes him sound like a drug runner, but he's not. And through he sells specialty steel, which is like a tongue twister, which is manufactured in China, and through his network there he had a manufacturing connection. So we the boys built a software platform that would articulate with mobile games platforms. So we were working with one of the biggest mobile game developers in the world. We built a platform that kind of sat behind their app and which allowed them to monetize their brand. So we had, merchandise. We did the manufacture of the merchandise that sat alongside this platform, and there was shipping and logistics and all that kind of business associated with it. And it was just, we were very lucky. We got very lucky very early. We signed a big deal kind of 6 months into the startup, and then that was the only thing we signed. And then for the next kind of almost 3 years and still ongoing now, courtesy of various tax departments, we are still trying to extricate ourselves from that.
Right. Okay. So, all right. Sounds like it was pretty tough.
Messy.
What did you? I suppose what was the first couple of things that happened as part of the tech startup that you never thought would happen, or you found particularly difficult?
Somebody bought us. I never thought that would happen. No. Sorry, I didn't let you finish your question.
Oh no, just like when you first started the tech startup, what I suppose what surprised you in the first 2 to 3 months? What was especially difficult that perhaps you weren't expecting, or?
Oh, I think it was just always full on, and whilst I'd had my own business, I'd not had my own business in that kind of context before. So all of a sudden we were a global concern almost overnight. So then it wasn't just a case of going, do we just like use Stripe for our website, or maybe we could sell on Etsy. Like, it wasn't that kind of level of, which is tricky, right? When you're doing something for the first time. But this was a case of, okay, so we've got to get international warehousing, and then, what about currencies in, multiple currencies, and we've got to translate our website into, X many different languages, and then we've got to deal with what are the import-export requirements, because we were making a physical product as well. So then there's all the stuff around barcoding and compliance and GSM, and just it never stopped. Like, and one of our lessons was that we tried to do everything when we should have been offering part of that solution, not the whole solution.
Right.
But you are, as a startup owner, you are chief problem solver, really. And I think it's interesting because since we've wound that down, my husband's gone on to work for a corporate, and he will often say, I don't understand why people just don't fix a particular, they bump into a wall and they just kind of keep bumping into the wall.
Right.
And he's like, well, why don't you just solve the problem? You don't have to know what the answer is. So I think that people who have had that startup experience are just naturally going, okay, well, we've just got to solve whatever problem it is, whether it's that there's no toilet paper in the toilet, or whether it's, I don't know, a merchant banking kind of login gateways. You just got to solve everything.
You just get it done. Yeah. Right. and that sounds really. So was that a daily experience for you? Was just how we've got a zillion problems coming in every day, and
there was always something on fire.
And like you got to try and prioritize which one to do. And did you have a process to do that? How did you kind of?
No, maybe that's part of the problem.
Right.
I think that the difficult part was that my husband and my brother, being technical, were focused always on the technical solution, and then we had me and my dad and my mum kind of doing the mop up around the edges, and with some fabulous input from our kind of accounts and strategic people. But just there was no process until probably 12 months into the thing. There was no process.
And would you do it again? Would you do another tech startup?
I would never do anything involving product.
Right.
Because that was the part of the, to my mind, that was part of the problem. Holding stock was stock that we were paying for that wasn't selling, that even after we'd wound down, we still had like 400,000 of in shipping containers sitting in a storage facility. So that was, and like the model that we used to, our business model was fundamentally flawed from the perspective of we thought that stock would kind of go out the door at particular kind of rates, and it didn't. It went slower than that.
Right.
So, I see as a stock holding business as not something that I would ever do again.
Right. Okay. And did you guys raise capital or do any of that type of stuff? You bootstrapped it at all?
Yeah.
Okay, so you didn't have to deal with all that side of the...
No, but I mean, in many instances, I think it probably, perhaps going through that process of VC or, even through an accelerator program or something, probably would have exposed some of the flaws in the business model. Who knows?
So, and how long was it from start to finish, like your involvement in it?
It was probably active for about 18 months. We got to the point where, in order to service a client that we had, we needed to. We were building a platform, so we had a team of 8 developers. And what effectively caused us to need to shut down was the fact that we couldn't keep paying them. As I said, the business kind of had one big client we took on. We were paid, and then nothing after that. So by the time we got to the end of that capital, there was nothing that we could keep paying people with except, our personal finances, which, and again, that got to the point where we were basically worried about where our next mortgage repayment was going to come from. So that's, we had to shut it down on that basis.
And can you talk me through the...
So sorry, that was about 18 months.
Okay, yeah, cool. And can you talk me through what was that like to decide to shut it down? Did you guys get in a room together and talk about it and say, we got to wind this up, or like what did that look like?
I think everybody at different points during that 18 months experienced some kind of mental like, that's it, can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
Except all those breakdowns didn't kind of happen at the same time. And if they had, I think it would have wound up much sooner. But we were always, someone would melt down and the rest of us would go, no, it's going to be all right, don't worry. And we'd counsel each other through it. And we'd kind of pick up and carry on. And then a couple of months later, somebody else would have a brain explosion. But when we did, we started, it's one of those things like, if you go to a party and there's like a critical mass of people there and then, a couple of people leave at midnight and then, by 12:30, a couple more people are gone and then there's just the stragglers hanging around. And it was a bit like that. We got to the point, my husband and I got to the point where we financially couldn't go on for much longer. So he got a job and that was kind of like the first person leaving the party. And then, we kind of tried to keep it going without him and then it didn't work. So I don't really even remember when we decided, that's it, we're all getting together and drawing a line under it. But it was just, progressively people, rats abandoning a sinking ship.
And what about what was it like to tell the developers that, did they work for you, I assume, like to tell them that, guys, was that tough to do, to wind it up with them?
Yeah, I thankfully it wasn't my responsibility to do that, but it was, and there had been a process of whittling them down as well, and so we'd gone from kind of a team of 8 to about a team of 6 to 3 to 1, and I think it would have been worse for those guys who were kind of left to the end. They were just kind of looking around for the axe to fall, I think. So nothing about that situation was nice at all. No.
Right. And so, and you were you in the non-tech side of things? Were you? How did you used to talk to tech? Like, so like, when I'm doing websites and doing apps or whatever, I think about it from like the business point of view or the marketing point of view, but I know there's so much of the tech that I don't know. And I really struggle to bridge that gap at times between me, non-technical, and talking to developers. What was your experience like with that? Or did you, you would have talked to your brothers, I assume, or who would have been?
Yeah, so they were all hugely tech focused. And I think one of the things that was difficult for me was feeling that because I wasn't technical, I didn't have kind of equal voice. And I don't mean that from I need to sit in the corner and shut up. But for me, I guess like I said, we were always putting out fires. And the things you mentioned, processes before, those kind of softer HR things were kind of left. And that's my expertise. Those things were left in favour of kind of keeping our heads above water. I don't necessarily. I guess I have listened to a lot of technical conversations over the time, so I guess I'm reasonably fluent in that kind of context. But I guess I don't feel that I need to have a deep understanding of plugging widgets together and lines of code and this native development language versus that or whatever. And I think actually that there is a lot of merit, or there's a lot of it's quite a skill to be able to kind of zoom out of that. And I don't know if you've ever been in a room with a whole bunch of technical people, but they usually start arguing about process style things, and particularly in a strategic business context, you can't have you can't have a strategic discussion at that level. You need to be having it kind of at a higher level. So yeah, I think the answer in a roundabout kind of way is being fluent enough to know if you're going to be bullshitted or led up the garden path at a technical level, but also having a link to the higher strategic. And you hire people who are technically savvy,
right? Yeah.
At least that's my view. You hire people who to be across all of those details, but you absolutely need to understand it from a business level perspective.
Yeah. Okay. And during this time, this 18 months, you're running this tech startup. So what was weekends or time away from work like? Like, were you able to turn off? Was there any time away from work?
There was not. there was not.
Okay.
There was not. I can remember traveling to Italy so my husband's sister was getting married in Italy, and at that time we were putting together a proposal for a European game studio. And of course these things always happen at the same, there's always there's no separation. Like, of course that deadline was the day before the wedding, or the timelines were very similar. And I can remember being in we were staying in Como in Italy, and my husband and I were basically tag teaming tourist things. So he would, so we're there for his sister's wedding.
Wow. Yeah.
And he'd be like, well, I'm going to go with my sister to Bellagio. You stay here and work on this version of the document. So I'd be there and then he'd come back and I'd say, well, I'm going to go have dinner with your folks. You stay here. And it was bullshit. It was seriously, there was 18 months of our lives were just written off with that. And, you'd book in think, okay, this Friday night we've got nothing on. We're just going to chill out and be normal human beings. And then something would explode. There'd be some kind of, I don't know, a server would eat a line of code or something like that, and everything. And all of a sudden, because our development team was based in Europe, so everything was always done at ridiculous kind of time zone differences. So my husband in particular would be staying up until all hours of the night, and my brother, who was based in France, would be, staying up all day and staying up all night so that we could kind of catch. It was stupid.
So do you think you look at it and you wonder other people who do this type of thing and stick with it or whatever?
They're bonkers. They're certifiable.
That's what I'm wondering. Because I've never done a tech startup myself. I'd been I kind of hang around, but I don't actually run it myself. And I just think it sounds really hard to justify writing off that much time, perhaps double, triple that, if it's going to work out. I find that why would we do it?
Well, I mean, maybe to flip it on its head, and so you run your own business. And what's that look like for you? How do you get weekends? Do you get night times to yourself, that kind of thing?
I do now, because I realised I had to, because I burn out. If I don't, I burn out too regularly. And then I have a week where I kind of lie in bed useless anyway. So instead of waiting for me to burn out, then I kind of try and have breaks along the way so that doesn't happen, and I can actually plan my downtime.
Okay. I guess my reason for asking is because I think about it now. I'm in my own business again, which is not as intense as the tech startup, but I mean it has its own challenges. I'm still the only person responsible for making the decisions, basically, and I've got to do the work. I think the difference is that I'm super, super passionate about this. This is mine. This is something that I want to make. And so the hours don't seem as punishing. So I'm wondering then if people who do succeed, I mean, you and I both know Aaron Birkby, who is a serial startup person. There are people who just thrive on that, and who are so passionate about it that the ridiculous hours and the never seeing your friends or whatever don't seem to matter. I'm not saying that Aaron never sees his family, but I guess you kind of, if that's your shtick, then you find a way to make it fit with your lifestyle. Certainly I don't want to be ever again at that ridiculous intensity. And I feel much more deliberate now about the way that I'm running my business, and I guess it helps now that my husband and I have got 2 little kids, so there's only so much time that you can spend working before somebody throws a toy at you.
Right. And so in now, is it more of a national or a local play than it is a global play?
Yeah, absolutely.
And does that make a big difference?
Well, I guess you're not looking at all the the complexities of multiple currencies, or the at the moment, my biggest concern is, do I charge GST when I'm dealing with someone in New Zealand, or like,
yeah.
So, the complexity of the problem is much more straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. And why do people come to you now? Like, what's their problems they have when they come to you? Is it that my business, I don't know what's going on, and you come in and kind of, as we were talking about before, diagnose?
There's usually two different types of people that I work with, and what connects both kind of audiences or markets is the diagnosis element. So I'm working with individual influencers and experts, so people who have built a business around their own IP, their own thought leadership, and I'm working with them to create diagnostic tools on the basis of that IP, in a way that, for lead generation and for leverage across their thought leadership practice. The other kind of clients I have are corporate or public sector agency clients, and I'm working with them around user experience. So, but it's still or customer experience rather than user experience, I guess, it's still that process of diagnosis. So really helping them understand, what's your business trying to do? What do your customers want? Mm-hmm. What do we need to do in the middle of that to add best strategic value?
Very interesting. So I do see you posting about some of these things on LinkedIn from time to time. What is what do you think people get wrong with the customer experience?
It makes it sound like they don't get anything right, which is not true. I think that the way I think about customer experience is that there are three levels of it. So at its most fundamental, people are focused on sales, and they're focused on product and price, specifically pushing more product at a lower price. And I like to say that that's like an arms race to the bottom, because when you are positioned or when you're focused on that, you're in competition with Amazon and Alibaba. Mm-hmm. And, your customers are in a constant state of readiness to disengage, because just as long as you're providing the cheapest price, then they'll buy you. But as soon as somebody else comes along and undercuts you, and they will, there goes your customer base. So I think oftentimes people focus on sales. There's, another group of businesses focus on service, which is admirable, because it's about building relationships between clients. Sometimes, though, what I have observed is that customer service interaction it's still missing the it's kind of almost like we're selling this and we're giving it to you, and it's still missing that kind of the customer focus, and that's why I reckon that customer service is yesterday's A game, and customer experience is kind of, I see it as the bar being set at its highest level, and organisations that get experience understand that our decision to buy things is emotional. It's not logical. The logic is post hoc. We go, Aston Martin, going to be the sexiest man in the world if I have an Aston Martin. And then we start to justify back from that. We're like, it's fuel efficient, and it's, its tyres only cost $1,000 or whatever. So we start justifying back from that. But the reason that we're buying it is emotional. So the businesses that can really tap into that emotion and understand that they are in the business of creating experience are the businesses that will be future-proofed.
Right. How do you do that, though? Because it's like when you're describing it, it sounds like you kind of need like a lot of empathy to really understand what someone's looking for, and it would be really tough for a lot of businesses, I think, to know what exactly on that level what their customers are looking for. Is there a way to sort of is it as simple as talking to their customers? Like, but then again, like, you ask people their questions, and sometimes they don't give you the answer that's useful. Like how do you get to it?
Well, I guess you got to ask the right questions. But that's useful. That's an interesting kind of reflection, because there's a famous quote about Henry Ford where he said, customers don't know what they want. You've asked them what they want, they would have said faster horses.
Yeah.
And actually, there's a thought leader in this space, Brian Solis, and he's based in the US, and he's done a lot of research into that statement, and he said it's actually, there's nowhere that he can find that attributes that statement to Henry Ford.
Oh, really? Okay.
But the point of contention there is, I guess, that people don't know what they want, and I guess it's up to us as someone selling a particular product or service to understand people's problem set and to deliver on that basis. And I think that people do actually know what they want. Going back to they know, they may not necessarily know that they want a car that's got all of these different features, but they know how they want to feel. They know what they don't want to feel. And then our job is to understand that and to design a product and a service experience that's about how people want to feel.
Right. Awesome. And I think that was 2. Were you going to say 3 things? That was 2 out of the 3?
I don't know.
Okay. I might have imagined that. But I ask this question every podcast, so I'm going to ask it to you as well. Do you have, what's your relationship like with self-doubt?
Can you not? I wish you told me about that one. So, it's interesting. I'm working with someone at the moment who has autism spectrum disorder, and one of the things that is difficult for this person is managing anxiety and the little voices in their head that suddenly turn something quite small into something quite big. And I was saying to this person, you know what, everybody's got that, which is not to be dismissive of that particular circumstance, but I think we've all got those little voices in our heads. And I think one of the things that I've been doing recently is mentoring future leaders within a technology company, working with one of my own mentors to do that. And what has stunned me is that these people who I look up to and go, oh my gosh, look at your career, are confessing things to me kind of in the mentoring relationship. And I'm like, but you're a CEO. What? Yeah. I thought you'd have this sorted out. Like, surely your business card tells you that, there's no need to doubt yourself. So I think the realization for me is that everybody has self-doubt, and it's just about how you manage it, which I've neatly avoided answering anything about my own relationship with self-doubt. But I think it's an ongoing evolution. That's a tautology, but it's managing the itty bitty shitty committee in your head and talking back to them. And I've actually given my inner mean girl has got a name, which I won't say because it relates to somebody that I used to know.
Okay.
But that particular person had that fit the avatar very well of the mean girl, and it's talking back and just questioning: is this on evidence?
Yep.
Is this doubt warranted?
Yeah. So and you found it useful to actually give your doubt a name.
Yeah, and talk
per
back.
se.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
And to kind of go, okay, thanks for your advice, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Really? Oh, that's awesome. How long have you been doing that for?
Probably about 6 months.
Okay. Cool. Okay, so it's relatively.
It's a new thing I'm trying out, but I think it seems to work well, because I realised that I was wasting a lot of mental energy on being frightened, and everybody's frightened, so just kind of pony up and do it anyway.
Awesome. Emily, it's been amazing. Thanks for being with us today, and we appreciate your time. Where's some places we can find you on the internet? On the interwebs?
Yeah. So good place to start is LinkedIn. I'm Dr Emily Verstege on LinkedIn. You could also find me on Facebook, and dremilyverstege.com.
Awesome. I'll link to all that in the show notes.
Thank
Emily,
you.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Be The Push podcast. Show notes can be found at bethepush.com/podcast and clicking on the relevant episode link. I appreciate your company and look forward to talking to you again soon.